Welcome to Education Matters, presented by the Public School Forum of North Carolina. I'm your host, Mary Ann Wolf. For those of you who regularly tune in, you know that we often talk about the importance of the Leandro case, which is focused on ensuring a sound basic education for all students. The case has been going on for 25 years, and yet many people still do not know what it could mean for education and students across North Carolina. WRAL recently produced a documentary about Leandro and interviewed people from across the state on what the case is, why it should matter to you, and why there may finally be a resolution in 2022. Joining us for today's discussion are the documentary's producer and superintendents from 2 districts across our state. We are so pleased to be joined by Cristin Severence, who's the WRAL documentary producer on the Leandro case. Cristin, welcome to Ed Matters.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'd love for you just to share with us, what is your documentary about and what compelled you to make it?
Leandro is such a big deal, right? And this documentary really looks at what it is, what has happened since it was filed in 1994, right? Why was it filed? What was the thought process behind the lawsuits? Why is it named Leandro? I really set out to answer and explore just why it's been going on for so long. How is that possible? We look at kind of what it's turned into. And really, at the end of the day, I hope people watch it and they understand the case and really why they should care, why they should pay attention, and why this matters.
Now, I know as part of the process, you met with many state leaders across the state and people in some of our communities. How did you decide who to talk to, and what were some of your takeaways from those conversations?
I could have easily done an hour on this. This is a 30-minute documentary, but I could have easily filled up an hour or longer, just, starting from the beginning and looking at, again, why it was filed and what was happening in the school districts in 1994, and then looking at what is happening in those districts today. And so I joined the WRAL documentary unit in November of 2021. And when I started at the end of last year, you'll remember, Leandro was everywhere. I kept hearing the name, hearing this name. And my colleagues did an excellent job really staying on top of the twists and turns and all of the updates. But because there was so much happening at the end of last year, so many things to stay on top of, there really wasn't time, especially when you're doing the daily news cycle, there wasn't time to explain what it was. It was filed in 94, and these counties said they couldn't afford to provide, a sufficient education. They didn't have the resources they needed. So when I heard the Cliff Notes version, I thought, it's still going on. It is still topping headlines. It's leading newscasts. And when you ask people about it, they have a general knowledge about it, but they really don't know. I said, I have to do this. We really just set off running, looking at, all right, well, let's reach out to the 5 original districts. And calling a school district and saying, I would like to bring my camera into your school and talk about resources. Not every district is really on board with that, to be honest with you. And I wanted to not only talk to those 5 school districts who filed the lawsuit, I also wanted to talk to some of the larger districts, right? And one of those districts was Halifax County Schools and Dr. Eric Cunningham. And he, schools do everything, and it's not easy to kind of say, okay, I'm going to come down and sit with you for X amount of time, and I need to go into several different schools and talk to your teachers. But he really did see the value in talking about this. Yeah. And so I went there, and we spent a good amount of time, with Dr. Cunningham. We went to an elementary school, we went to a high school, and the best stories, and you really can't do a documentary without people being transparent. and open. And these educators were. They were so open about the things they're proud of. Okay, so the things that they want to highlight, but they were also very transparent about what they're lacking and why they believe, money from Leandro could help these schools that are here be here. And, it's not always easy to point that out, because you do want parents watching, as a school leader, you want parents to say, oh, they are doing great things. I'm not going to, for a public school, they're thinking, I don't want, families to choose a charter school. And so it's hard to talk about, the things you wish you could change, but they did. And, talked about the one elementary school, they only have PE. They can't afford art. They can't afford music. They don't have enough teaching assistants. So with all of these kids being behind, especially because of COVID, they can't do one-on-one. They can't do small groups. I interviewed a principal at an elementary school. He shares a nurse, a mental health counselor, and a social worker. He shares all three of those positions. He maybe has a nurse 2 days a week. And he said, after, especially since COVID, it's really tough. It's really tough on his students. So we talk to schools, we talk to lawmakers. And as you know, it's not hard to find out how people really feel about Leandro. It's no secrets, right? And so we interviewed retired lawmakers. I interviewed Senate President Phil Berger. And really what I learned is that I feel the two biggest fights when it comes to Leandro, it's funding and who can order whom to pay. And that's really at the crux of the issue. And really, it depends on who you ask. You will get very, very different answers.
No, I really appreciate that. And just you diving into this topic. And, we've spent a lot of time and energy on it as well at the Public School Forum. And I think when you look at it as an investment and what is identified throughout the case as being key for what kids need, I think you've lifted up a lot of those: a high quality, well-prepared educator, a high quality, well-prepared principal for every school. We need early childhood supports. We need post-secondary pathways. We need the counselors, social workers, nurses. And right now, many of those roles are not provided by the state and not near the ratios we need. So I really appreciate you lifting that up. But I want to make sure that people who are curious, that are listening to the questions you've posed, how do they get to see this documentary? And what do you anticipate in the coming months with the Leandro case?
Wednesday, March 16th, 7:30 on WRAL. You can also see it on WRAL.com. You can see it on all the streaming platforms, and watch it and rewatch it and share it, please. What do I think is going to happen? Well, I've talked with so many experts, and they all say this is going to the state Supreme Court. And really, what I've learned is how the court rules just may depend on who's in charge. If people don't know at home, right now it's a 4-3 Democratic-led bench, and 2 seats are on the ballot this year in 2022. And if one Republican is elected, it becomes a Republican-led state Supreme Court. So I think it's really going to depend on who is elected to see what happens with Leandro.
Well, we know how critical this is, and we so appreciate you being here with us, and we will definitely be elevating and sharing the documentary. So thank you so much, Cristin.
Thank you so much for having me.
After the break, we will be joined by superintendents from Greene County Schools and Chatham County Schools.
Education Matters is brought to you each week in part by Participate Learning, uniting our world through global learning.
We are so pleased today to be joined by Dr. Patrick Miller, the superintendent of Greene County Schools, and Dr. Anthony Jackson, the superintendent of Chatham County Schools. And to both Patrick and Tony, you all have joined us many times over the years to talk about critical issues. So it makes so much sense that you're here today to talk to us about the Leandro case. Patrick, I'd love to start with you. You're a member of the Leandro Commission and lead a rural district in our state. Why is Leandro so important for our school, our students in North Carolina?
providing a sound basic education is not just a constitutional obligation, but more importantly, it's a moral obligation that we must fulfill to our children and to our state's future. The general premise of the Leandro lawsuit is that the state has not met its constitutional duty to provide equal educational opportunities for all students in North Carolina. The lawsuit was filed to correct that. Well, here we are 20 years later, and Judge David Lee has signed an order that the state must implement a comprehensive remedial plan that is based on the recommendations of the West Ed report and the Governor's Commission on Access to Sound Basic Education. This is the first time in this case where we have a truly comprehensive evidence-based plan that provides specific actions that the state needs to take. The plan provides our state with a unique and once-in-a-generation opportunity to leverage our state's resources to truly transform and strengthen our public education system. This is especially important and timely as we are hopefully exiting the pandemic and are focusing on the issues in schools that have been exacerbated by COVID.
Tony, you have been a superintendent for many years in 3 districts across the state, and you've spent a lot of years in each of those. And Vance is one of those, which is one of the original Leandro districts. And I know we've talked a lot about that, what has happened since that initial court case that Patrick just referenced. But I'd love to hear from your perspective from those different communities, why Leandro is important right now.
I want to first follow up with what Patrick mentioned, that it's not only a moral obligation, it's a moral imperative. And for me, I continue to say that we have the opportunity right now to capture the urgency of the moment. COVID has provided us a tremendous opportunity to look inward and to determine how we can, in fact, change those outward success indicators that we all want for every single child. I would ask us right now, in my experience in the districts that I've served, I would honestly ask each individual in this state to ask the question, are we doing enough? And have we done enough to ensure the future of our state? And that means, have we taken care of every single child to the best of our ability? I often say that as an educator, after I finish my tenure, my term of duty, what I don't want to do is look back and say that I could have or should have done something else. And what I believe is that Leandro is providing us that moment right now to really stand up and be counted and make a real declaration publicly around what's right, what's best for our children, and exercise our personal commitments to doing it and doing it now. I just believe that we have that moment now, and I hope that we won't miss that moment.
Schools have done everything that they can with the resources they have to try and improve access to opportunities and outcomes for students. And did you want to talk a little bit about that today, especially given your experience in different districts?
Sure, and I will say this unapologetically. I believe that many of our rural districts are the leaders in innovation for this state. They have taken the ball and they've dribbled it down the court and they've scored every time. But they've had to play in a game where the rules continue to change. And so when you look at districts like Greene, where they're one of the leaders in this state around STEM, you look at districts like Vance, that's a leader in innovation, and you look at those districts like Hope County, you look at districts like Cumberland and Robinson, where while some of the macro types of indicators would say that there are challenges, absolutely. But when you begin to look under the hood, you find well-oiled machines and well-running engines operating those districts. And so I'm excited about and I was excited, I continue to be excited about the work that goes on in many of our rural districts, and especially those districts that some of us have counted out. over time. They have demonstrated over and over and over again that they were built for this moment, and that in fact they're meeting the needs of their children, even with the minimal resources that they might have at their disposal. So I would say don't miss the opportunity to celebrate the success that's happening in many of those districts. I dare you to just go and look at what's happening in Halifax County. I dare you to go and look at what's happening in some of these smaller districts, and you'll be blown away by some of the success stories that are there. And most importantly, you're going to be shocked that there are many, while there may be F schools there in some cases, there are many, many A students.
As this longtime superintendent and leader across the state, how do you think the challenges have shifted over the years, and what do we need now?
So I have two thoughts on this. First, the student populations are declining in most rural areas, and school leaders there are having to deal with the declining budgets that accompany that population loss. So in my district, which is Greene County, we've lost about 500 students over the last dozen years or so. Second, we can't underestimate the impact of the pandemic on education. Certainly the influx of the federal dollars has helped in the short term, but that funding will disappear in another year or so. So if Judge Lee's comprehensive remedial plan is funded and implemented, most rural school districts will see a major increase in state funding for the public schools. In Greene County, we would see a 44% increase in state funding. And you can see how it would impact your own district. If you Google Every Child NC, they have produced an impact analysis tool so that you can see how your child's school district would benefit from the plan.
I'm just curious to how you would respond to that question of people listening. What can they do, and why does this matter so much for them?
The first thing you can do is encourage someone to be a teacher. Let's start there. Encourage your child to be a teacher. Go back and become a teacher. It's been a great profession for me, and I absolutely love what I do. People always will talk about the negative side of the work, but I want to be one of the individuals out here that will extol the virtues and the wonderful things that a teaching profession will bring into your life, the relationships, the opportunities to grow, the professional experiences, all of those things. So the first thing is encourage someone to become a teacher. And then I really do believe that we're going to have to really come to terms with priorities. And I think we're going to have a priority statement in terms of commitment of resources to public education, and be unapologetic about our support of public education, not to the detriment of others. I think we've spent too much time splitting hairs about public, private, charter. To be unapologetically supportive of public schools and be willing to say that. I just believe that you can, in fact, encourage people to look at this model as an option and as an opportunity. And then always remember that if the schools are going to be the hub of the community, then that requires all of us to be a part of the school system. When COVID struck, we were called upon immediately to respond and react and to support our communities. They didn't go, it's funny, we didn't go to the churches, we didn't go to anywhere, we went to the schools. And so if the schools are the hub of the community, I think we have to now make ourselves that place where all of the resources of a community are wrapped around that school, so that if we're ever hit like this again, we have the infrastructure to do the work that we can do to support our community and our students.
Patrick, I'd love to give you the final word. Why is this so important to everybody in our state?
So you've heard me reference Judge Lee's comprehensive remedial plan several times today, but I believe that it's important, and that plan would provide, as Tony said, some actions that will help ensure every school has a well-qualified, well-trained teacher in every classroom, so that every child has one. Every school building has a well-trained and qualified principal. And yes, we need to go out and recruit some more. So do please tell everyone you see, please go be a teacher. But also the plan would ensure that our schools have the textbooks and instructional materials that they need to educate our students. that every K through 3 classroom would have a teacher assistant, and that every eligible 4-year-old would be able to go to pre-K to help ensure that they're successful when they start kindergarten the following year.
Well, I thank each of you so much for reminding us how much of this is common sense in terms of what we need to support our schools and what the investments are for, but also bringing it back to the importance of leaders like both of you. And I've learned from you, and I so appreciate what you do every day, and just thank you for that. And we appreciate you helping to lift up this critical issue yet again. After the break, this week's final word. It has been nearly 30 years since the beginning of North Carolina's school funding case known as Leandro, which was filed by plaintiffs in 5 poor school districts who gave voice to the fact that children couldn't get the education they deserved. Since that time, it has been repeatedly found that our state has not been providing the resources or public policies required to meet the fundamental needs of each and every one of our students across our state that is mandated by our Constitution. Those problems remain with us today, as WRAL spotlighted in their recent documentary. Reporter Cristin Severence spent weeks understanding how one of the original Leandro school districts, Halifax County Schools, grapples with inadequate resources directed to their public schools and the impact this reality has on their district students. Seeing this reporting and knowing that these issues still persist today are hard to understand when we have a strong roadmap in place for solving these problems and a court order in place that directs billions of dollars to investing in the solutions that will serve our children's academic, social, and emotional needs. On Education Matters, we've taken some deep dives into the issues and policy solutions that serve as the building blocks for a high-quality educational experience for all. From revising school finance and accountability systems to developing robust initiatives around teacher and principal recruitment and retention, the long-term Leandro Comprehensive Remedial Plan offers strong directives in these areas, and many stakeholders have come on our show to explain how to turn these ideas into action. Our superintendents today shared why this matters for kids. Investments are needed to maximize the opportunities, access, and outcomes for our students and to prepare them for college, career, and citizenship. The plan also emphasizes the need to focus investments on the whole child by providing funding that increases the number of school instructional support personnel, or SISP, that includes school counselors, nurses, social workers, and psychologists, to begin to meet national guidelines, initially prioritizing high poverty schools. This is an important area of investment that we have highlighted repeatedly, as we know that students' basic physical and emotional needs must be met before they can be ready to learn. And throughout the key areas addressed in the 8-year action plan, the investments and subsequent work that is laid out can ultimately serve to take important steps toward addressing the systemic inequities that exist for so many of our students, especially students of color and low-income students. Addressing each of these and other critical issues requires investments, which means funding. With the appropriate policies and resources, the investments will help address the immediate needs of our schools and districts as we begin the recovery from COVID-19. And they will also support critical areas for long-term efforts to ensure that every child in North Carolina will graduate prepared for college, career, and engaged citizenship. North Carolina is fortunate to have resources available to address the needs of our schools and students, the understanding of what is needed, and the will of education stakeholders and policymakers to enact purposeful and effective policies. We must use this critical point in time to lay the groundwork for accelerating investments and innovations in education for all of our students. Our schools, districts, and communities do not just need or ask for more money for the sake of having more money. The need, as it has been for decades, is for investments in these specifics and other critical areas that research has shown makes a difference for students. Thank you for taking time with us to learn and think about education. You can watch the documentary to learn more about Leandro on Wednesday, March 16th on WRAL or online. That's all for today, and we'll see you next week.